So here we are again, back for another episode of Talking Technology with NCBI Labs. Now on the panel today, we have a full complement of JP, Sean and Daniel. And do you know, I was very tempted to lead off with JP's full name, John Paul, but I always kind of get the impression that we might have a little bit of trouble if I start out introducing John Paul and don't follow up with something like Ringo and George. That might cause a little bit of a problem. So maybe I'll stay away from that. I'll just use JP.
I think it could be confusing to you. It actually sounds like a different person, John Paul. I think people would be confused.
Yeah. And it also kind of wouldn't be too fair, would it? It's like you get to take up two of the names.
Yeah.
You're like
yeah.
half the Beatles, John and Paul.
He was so good, they named him twice.
Very good.
That's it. So 2 shows in a row now that we've had everyone available. I'm not sure how long that can last, but sure we'll enjoy it while we can. Now, anyway, joining us on the show today, we're going to have 2 guests with us. We have NCBI's National Access and Mobility Manager, Chantelle Smith, who's going to give us a couple of updates on technologies we've covered on the show before, but she'll also be talking to us about the Possibility Project as well, what that's all about. And we'll hear from her on that a little bit later on. Chantelle is going to be with us throughout the show, in fact, because we're also going to be talking about an interesting piece of technology that's captured people's attention recently, the HapNav device. We'll be talking to the creator of the HapNav, Professor Derek O'Keefe, and that's coming up in just a few minutes' time. And of course, we're going to have our usual sections on tech news and tech help as well a little bit later on in the show. Before we begin, a quick reminder, as always, that if you want to get in touch or ask a question, you can do that in the Q&A panel in Microsoft Teams, or as usual, you can email us at labs@ncbi.ie. So let's get the show underway, and straight off, let's welcome Chantelle Smith back to the show. Good to have you with us again, Chantelle.
Thanks, Jude, for having me. It's wonderful to be able to come on the show today and talk about mobility and innovation in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really good to have you back on the show. You've been with us a couple of times before, of course, but maybe just remind us a little bit about that element. You mentioned there mobility particularly. What has your work with NCBI involved so far in that region, in that area?
Yeah, so I'm coming up very close to my 3-year anniversary at NCBI, okay. Would you believe? And for the bulk of that period of time, I've focused my work on orientation and mobility. That's really the bread and butter of what I do and what I'm passionate about. And there's also the element of access, but I started working off at the National Training Centre at Whitworth Road, and there was a good piece of work there around creating a QQI module there to get people who are blind or vision impaired into employment and education through empowering them with information around orientation, mobility and access. We had a period of time, dare I say the C word, COVID, but there was then a real shift in focus as well. So there was this hybrid training approach for a period of time where we weren't just one-on-one training with people, but looking at how we deliver orientation and mobility virtually as well. So that was a big portion of time as well, and really where my work with Microsoft Soundscape came full circle, I guess, and how I came to be working with those guys, and we and launched the Microsoft Soundscape app in August last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were able to devote the full show to that, which was great to be able to do that. Tell us a little bit about how that's been going since. Have there been any updates or feedback or anything you can tell us about?
Absolutely. I guess that piece around Microsoft Soundscape continues. They're very genuine in their co-design approach, so they're constantly working with us to improve the functionality of that app. So far as even yesterday, I linked in with them and another mobility instructor, specifically on their new route functionality within the app. So there's a new functionality where you can create and share routes with your family and friends. which is very, very exciting. It's also an incredibly powerful tool for mobility instructors as well when they're teaching orientation and mobility to their service users as well.
Yeah, very good. And I'd imagine that's kind of a big part of the role anyway, is the back and forth of it. Obviously there's kind of consultation, all the work that leads up to the launch of something, but then there's the continuing development as well.
Yeah, like anything, Microsoft Soundscape isn't a silver bullet, and it needs continuous development with various versions and iterations of, and it's amazing, even since I think I started working with the app with service users back in, I think it was 2017 in Australia, how that app looks completely different today. But the fact that we can now not just personalize markers or points of interest within that app, that we can then go in and create, string all of those markers together and personalize a route is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we'll do is maybe we'll come back to you a little bit later on with specifics about what's happening at the moment, and even a little bit of what's going to be happening in the future. But one of the reasons we wanted Chantelle to join us today is because we have this kind of theme, if you like, for the show about mobility and orientation, and really that's kind of running through the show along with some of the technology that's out there. And on our next section, we're actually going to be talking about a device that's featured recently on national television as well. It's really caught people's imagination and attention. It's an ongoing research project called HapNav. It's a device that's come out of this ongoing research project. And so we wanted to have a bit of a discussion about that on the show. It's something that's come to people's attention recently. And we're very happy to say that the man behind the research project, Professor Derek O'Keefe, joins us on the show today. So you're very welcome, Professor O'Keefe.
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today.
Good to have you on the show. First of all, Professor O'Keefe, I noticed that your Twitter handle is Physicianeer, and I just thought I couldn't start this section without just asking you a little bit about that. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, good question. So I guess a physicianeer is somebody who's dual qualified and trained in medicine as a physician and also in engineering. So it's a physician-engineer combination. And I think that brings a different skill set than the traditional, medical training or engineering training. When you have the skills in both domains, you're kind of an interpreter across two different worlds, and it gives you the opportunity to do research that cross-pollinates those two fields. So I would have trained originally as an engineer, done a degree in electronic engineering, a master's, then a PhD in biomedical engineering, and then after that, then I went and did a postdoc in Boston in Harvard, where I worked with a group of people there who were on what's called the HST program, Health Sciences Technology. And as your listeners might know, in America, you don't do medicine unless you've done a degree in something else. It's called a graduate program in America. So a lot of people in America might have done science as an undergrad before they do medicine, or indeed, in this case, in Boston, they do engineering, and then they go on and they do a medical course that's kind of built around clinical medicine, but also about innovation. So after studying there as a postdoc, I was inspired to go back and do medicine, and to figure out how I could contribute to medicine clinically, but then also bring this heritage of engineering training to the bedside.
Very good. And I guess that kind of combination of skills and background qualification and all those sort of things have led you into your work with the Hive project. What's that about?
Yeah, so when I finished my medical training, I went to the States, but back there again, I trained for a while at Mayo Clinic, which, as your listeners might know, is a really great hospital. It's very, very strong international reputation for kind of patient-centered care and patient-centered innovation. So when I came back and got a post here in Ireland in 2018, I got a post as consultant physician at University Hospital Galway and professor of medical technology. So straight away, I had a mandate and a desire to create a laboratory whereby we would combine all the different skill sets that are needed for real applied patient care, not basic science stuff, which is important, but might take 5, 10, 20 years to actually reach the bedside. So we set up the Hive Lab, We call it the hive because, as you might know, hives are very busy and involves lots of people or in bees working together to create something that's greater than themselves. So our hive is the health innovation via engineering laboratory. And that has a lot of researchers and clinicians and scientists. We have computer engineers, software engineers, educationalists, psychologists, patients. We have lots of people in that laboratory contributing to all different kinds of innovation that has real applied significance at the bedside today, not tomorrow.
Brilliant. Yeah, very good. And we might get a chance to mention one or two of those in a few minutes. But obviously, you're here today to talk to us about the HapNav device, which kind of arose from that background that you've been giving us there. Can you tell us just maybe even in very broad strokes, just to start with, just what is the HapNav device?
Yeah, so the HapNav stands for haptic navigation. Haptic meaning kind of touch feedback. It's that sensitivity you get when you hold your mobile phone and it vibrates, or you're holding a game controller and it vibrates. That's called haptic feedback. And navigation, obviously, meaning, you know, the ability to be able to navigate your environment. And it started about 2 years ago, BC, before COVID. And one of my patients, you know, we see lots of patients in clinical practice, and one of my patients, you know, in particular, we went through the usual things that doctors talk about, which are the indices, like what's your blood pressure, what's your blood cholesterol, what's your blood sugar, in particular for diabetes patients. And we got chatting then as well about, you know, what's going on in her life, what's important to her. And she had mentioned that she had recently been registered legally blind. And that, you know, obviously it was quite challenging for her in her day-to-day. She was you know, she's a young patient. She's interacting a lot with the world in a social way. And she actually felt quite conscious at times of having to find her white stick to navigate. You know, socially, she might have felt awkward about it, but then even practically, where was it? It always had to be on her, as it were. And I spoke with her at the time about, you know, what about a guide dog and so on. And she mentioned that there's a long waiting list for that. And she had this comment. She said to me, you know, the white cane has been there for hundreds of years. Surely someone could come up with some technology to make my life a bit easier for navigating. And that kind of planted the seed in my head to develop a device in the Hive Lab then, which we did over the last 2 years.
Very interesting. And just maybe even as a point of clarification, that was kind of where the inspiration came from, and maybe what the initial goal was. Was the end result a device that takes the place of a cane?
So I would say it complements, not competes with the cane. It's kind of like if you think about transport, you know, you have trains and cars and trucks and lorries and bikes. For drinking something, you have cups and glasses and beakers. So what this device does is it does help your navigation. But for example, probably around an environment that you're partially familiar with already. Like, so for example, around your home, you might be sitting in the chair and you might have to get up and do something. And then rather than having to find the cane about how to get around your house, this thing is on your wrist. You just get up and you walk, and, you know, you can navigate. Similarly, if you're, you know, going into a hotel room, you know already the room is a certain layout in your mind, but this device helps you bumping into the things that are near. And what's interesting is the first version of the device that we developed for the patient, who was actually a really active part of the design team, which was great. We call it public patient involvement in science. And I think it's a really good mandate for scientific institutions around the world to have patients and the public involved in what the universities and the science agencies are creating. So the patient was involved early on. And one of the first iterations we had was something like a TV remote control, that when you point it at an obstacle, it vibrates. And the closer you get, the stronger the vibration. And the inspiration obviously is from bats, you know, that they can see by ultrasound, the reflective wave of the ultrasound. And then the secret sauce was, rather than giving you a beep like you might have when your car reverses, it was to turn that into kind of a vibration signal that increases in intensity. But what we found with the handheld version was that you had to hold it all the time. It was almost getting back to the problem of the cane, having to find it, having to use it, having to hold your hand out. So we developed a glove initially, which we called in the lab the Jedi Glove, because, you know, like the famous Star Wars saying, you could feel the Force. And the glove was great. We thought it was great in the lab, and this is often what happens in science. We were trying it out a couple of hours a day in the lab, and it was working great. But when the patient actually used it, they said, yeah, it's great, but my hand is actually quite tired after a while holding it out in front of me and sweeping the room, trying to build up a 3D picture in my mind. You know, using it every day, that's not the way I want to use it. And also now I have this big, glove on my hand. So we shrunk the glove size down to see would that improve it, and it didn't. And then we said, let's just take the next leap. Let's go from a Jedi Glove concept to a wristwatch size device, which is what you saw then in the Changemakers documentary on RT1, which is basically a haptic navigation feedback, or HapNav, that's on your wrist.
Yeah.
So now we've shrunk the electronics down using what's called SMT, surface mount technology, down to a device that's more ergonomic for the patient. And we did that with a really great team. Ian and Roisin Nolan helped us with this. They're medical device designers and developers here in the west of Ireland. And so kind of tapping into industry skills, we're able to take it from a university prototype to a more industry prototype and get the kind of shrinkage that we wanted to for more day-to-day use. And the advantage now is you can keep your hands down by your side in almost what we call the anatomical pose. And then just by turning your wrist left and right and up and down, you can get that same sweep of the room and that same tactile feedback of what's around you. And it's by all accounts from our patients' feedback, it's quite intuitive to use, and it's quite useful. You just get out of your seat and you have it already on your wrist.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And it's interesting that you just mentioned there a minute ago as well, the idea of obviously something that seems to be a great concept in the science laboratory or whatever, just the importance of testing as well. And we might come back to that in a moment as well, because I think that's quite an important point to make. I'd like to bring in Chantelle again here a little bit, because obviously, as we mentioned earlier, Chantelle is kind of NCBI's resident expert in all things mobility as well. So Chantelle, when you kind of hear about new technology like this that comes out, kind of very innovative things, people exploring new ways to apply existing technology even, what do you think about that? How does that kind of, what's your own feeling about that?
Look, I'm excited around I guess there's been a wave of mobility innovation, and I think we need to really embrace those opportunities that come with increased access and technology. And so I'm really, really thrilled about that. I do think that there's a few elements to it as well, that we've been in the O&M profession been talking about the future and replacing canes and dogs and all sorts of things since 1979, and this whole idea of mobility innovation and enhancing mobility alongside primary mobility aids as well is not a new narrative, and that there is other existing electronic travel aids that do the same thing as well. So I'm excited about the future possibilities and where this mobility innovation might take us.
I think that's quite an interesting point that you make there as well, because, and I know, Derek, Professor O'Keefe, from talking to you before, that's kind of very much in your mind as well, isn't it? It's kind of, the technology is here and it's putting things together in a way that's useful for people, but it's also the potential for the future and how it can be adjusted or adapted and continued to be developed.
Yeah, I think a lot of things in medicine and medical technology, it's really important to separate the hype from the hope, if you know what I mean. A lot of things in technology are 10 years away. They're kind of what I call horizon technology. They're almost touchable, but not quite. And what happened in the 70s was that a guy called Gordon Moore figured out that you could double the density of transistors on an integrated circuit. It's called Moore's law, that roughly and he went on to found a small company called Intel, but he noticed that every 18 months you could do twice the processing for the same footprint. So for the same inch of black integrated circuit that you might see if you open up the back of a radio or a television, that 1 inch piece of plastic has stayed the same size since the 1970s. What's changed is the amount of transistors you can etch onto it has doubled every 18 months. And it's a remarkable law of physics almost called Moore's law. And because of that, now we all have supercomputers in our pockets, mobile phones. You have these apps on your phone now that can give you kind of portable magnifiers that you wouldn't have dreamed about 10 years ago. You probably would have had to go out and buy a bespoke instrument to do it. Now it's just a free app on your phone. And same with navigation aids that can be, you know, kind of audio feedback of your directions. And we're at that cusp now whereby we have had this almost Cambrian explosion of digital technology in your pockets. And I know we were chatting earlier about, for example, we're getting really good at image recognition now, spotting objects in your environment and then, you know, giving audio clues of what they are. That's not that far away. You know, it's been tested in a lot of labs around the world, and it's reasonable in our lifetime to think that's going to happen, as in the next 10 to 20 years, that's going to be more mainstream. Be that patients who have, you know, visual acuity problems, and there's a device that can say door ahead or, you know, stop, you know, there's some obstruction, to, for example, a patient with diabetes or with an obesity problem, looking at food and then their augmented reality glasses telling them the calories or carbohydrates in that food. So we're getting to that front door, as it were. You probably heard a lot recently about the metaverse, and a lot of that is more virtual immersive reality. But actually the hybrid world of the augmented reality, that's where a lot of the exciting innovation is going to happen in the next 5 years. And again, this is science that's practically possible. We're not talking about kind of horizon science of teleportation or, you know, that kind of stuff that only exists in movies. We're talking about technology that's available at the moment that just has to be pulled together to create these mobility aids of the future, as we're trying to do with the HapNav.
Yeah, very good. And it is interesting because it is often that thing of sometimes you've got to be prepared to go down a route that might have to be tweaked or adjusted. But if you're not prepared to do it in the first place, to kind of push the boundaries a little bit and see where it can lead you and see what it can do, you kind of don't have that spark that actually gets you somewhere. So it is very interesting just hearing about it and hearing about some of the things that are possible. Just to come back to your point about separating the hype from, did you say the hype from the hope? Was that it?
The hope from the hype, or whatever you want to. I mean,
hype.
The idea is that, you know, sometimes obviously you hear about a new device or technology. It sounds amazing. It sounds like it's going to be available next Monday in your clinic. But science is a slow game, and kind of what you alluded to there, there's very few things in science that change overnight. If you think about like our Stone Age cousins, you know, 10,000 years ago, they came out of the cave and they probably looked and said, you know, I'd love to get onto the forest and I'd love to just to fly over there, but I probably have to walk 6 days to get there. But they didn't sit around and say, let's just wait for an airplane to be invented. You know, they first kind of tamed the horse, and then they got the carriage, and then they got the bike, and then they got the motorized car, and then, you know, so it was iterative. And then all during that time, then now we're at the time of the electric car. Pretty soon we're going to have mobile, you know, kind of rotary cars, you know, like mini drones bringing us places. So you don't just wait for, you know, a massive change in your technology. It's incrementally improved. And I think a lot of people forget that when they read about science that's happening in universities. They think it'll be available to the general consumer very quickly, and often it isn't. I think that's just something always just to put an asterisk on the hype from the hope. I think that's important.
Yeah, definitely. And to be honest, I think we've had that before in the past, where there's maybe been some technologies that have been kind of hyped up, and I suppose in some ways there is the element of the format of the show that it comes across in. It doesn't necessarily always lend itself to an in-depth kind of an examination of how something works or the drawbacks of something. But if somebody's expectations is for something that does everything, they're bound to be disappointed. And it's kind of useful for us to be able to have a bit of a conversation like this, because the HapNav itself, there's enough innovation and potential in it that it actually is a really good thing. We just want to make sure people have the right expectation, the right hope, the right way of looking at it as well. I know this is a hard question to answer. It's probably an easy question to answer in one way, but maybe a little bit difficult on an interview. But if you were to kind of point out the drawbacks yourself, now, I don't want you to be picking holes completely in it or anything like that, but just if you're trying to kind of manage somebody else's expectations, what would you say the HapNav wouldn't be used for or shouldn't be used for?
Yeah, so I guess one of the challenges, obviously, with the device that, you know, emits a signal and waits for a bounce back is that it assumes you're pointing the device in the right direction, you know, and you might not always be. And certainly things like uneven surfaces would be a challenge unless you're pointing at the ground at all times. I mean, if you think about with the walking cane or stick, that's normally on the ground or an inch or two off the ground. You don't hold that usually at chest height, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whereas the HapNav is really for stuff that's chest height and above, because that's roughly where your arm points to when it's at rest by your hips. So you have to make an effort to point down to see if a step is coming, if that makes sense. And you can do that. And what I've gathered so far from the feedback with the patient that's involved with the design team is the place she finds it most useful at present is actually around her house. Because she has a pretty good idea of the layout, but things move all the time, even in our houses, especially if you're living with other people. So it's very useful for her for that, to get around a surface that she knows is relatively flat, except for odd places where there's steps, but it can prompt her to remember there's a step there, or that somebody has closed a door, or somebody has moved something. Now, I don't think she'd ever use it maybe for navigating down Shop Street, because there's too many variables there. But what she might do is navigate down Shop Street with maybe a guide dog in one hand and then this in the other hand to help her navigate more efficiently. So you can make what you think is a small change in someone's life, but as she said to me, it makes a big difference. It's a small change in her life, what we might almost consider, does it really make that much of an improvement? But for her, it's profound, because she then doesn't have to wait to link somebody to move rooms if she's in a hotel or something like that. She can do it herself. She's the confidence to do it. So I think that's important, as you said, to temper that with it, that it acts as an additional sensory input when you didn't have it before. Yeah.
And I think that's quite interesting how you described it there, about just kind of even the idea of waist height and above, kind of ideally. In a way, you can see how that works along with a cane, for example, and then you've got input from both areas, if you like, and that kind of works well together. So it is a very interesting device. You mentioned before that there's been quite a bit of testing ongoing anyway, and is that ongoing still?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So again, when we first started this, we had a really good team with Muazzam Hussain. He was a biomedical engineering student, and he was interested in doing a really kind of innovative biomedical project. So we brought him on board for this with one of the earlier versions of it. And again, you have to kind of test it out. So we set up obstacle courses. Initially, it was students we used who we blindfolded to get them to move around with the device. And once we were happy that it was working as we thought it would, then we introduced the patient to use the device and got their feedback on it. And then, as I said, we went through all these different iterations of it over 18 months. And you have to remember as well, that during COVID, a lot of our research was put on hold, because obviously, in my case, I had to go back full time to the front line. But we nevertheless, we persisted as best we could at evenings and weekends and nighttime. So we got it to a point now whereby we've given the device to the patient who's using it around the house, and we're meeting her again at the end of this month to find out what feedback she has for us. Maybe it's a slight change in the angle of the sensor. Maybe it's more intensity of the vibration. These kind of things. You don't want a device that's too sensitive, because if it's vibrating on your arm when something is 3 meters away or 4 meters away, that's too much. You probably want something in a cone of about a meter and a half to give you enough warning that you'll slow down your gait or your walking, that you won't bang off something, but not too sensitive that it's 3 meters away. So they're the kind of stuff we're getting feedback at the moment. And once we're happy with the kind of final design, what we'll do is we'll what's called freeze the schematics. We'll say, okay, we're at a point now where the layout of the actual 3D shell, as it were, that goes on your wrist with the strap, the layout of the PCB, the printed circuit board, the code that we've written for it, we're happy that this is a functioning, useful system. And what we'll do is we'll freeze everything. And then what we've proposed to do for this project is to make it what's called open source. So this isn't for a profit project. It's our gift, as it were, to the wider community in science and in medicine. So we share it in a portal, some of your listeners might be aware, called GitHub. And that's an online portal where you can share open source anything. So, for example, during COVID, my team, we made ventilator splitters. You might have heard some of them in the news in the last few years with COVID. So again, we innovated very rapidly and created a way to split a ventilator to ventilate 2 patients. And again, rather than just keeping it here in Galway, which we use the device here, we shared it open source on these repositories, and then people were able to download it in Chicago or Cairo. So it's the same with the HapNav. We'll share it openly. We're not going to patent it. We're going to say, if you want to use this, if you want to download it, do that and build it yourself and improve it. And if you improve it, please go put it back up on the shared repository and share it again. It's a really great movement, the open source movement. And again, like the Hive concept, many people working together is way stronger than one person working on their own. So I like the idea of it, and I think it'll make it a better device by giving up kind of ownership of it, by sharing it.
Yeah, very good. And I mean, that straight away, I think that a lot of people will be very interested to hear that that's what's kind of coming down the line, and that's how they can get their hands on it. I guess it also does, again, and I'm kind of trying, I don't want to kind of make too much of a big point of it, but even just the thing of, it does emphasize again, having a conversation like this is important, simply because somebody doesn't want to download it, start using it and using it wrong. But that's the case with anything, isn't it? As if it's open source, but it's kind of having that thing of the right expectation, using it the right way as well. It's a really interesting thing. Do you find with the testing side of it, are there kind of obstacles to getting the feedback, if you like? I know that you've been ongoing testing as well, and that COVID has caused a little bit of an issue, but even in terms of getting enough testers and getting the enough feedback and things like that. Yeah, so
again, we've been fortunate that this idea came from a patient, and we very much included them the whole journey. So I'm pretty confident that, obviously, like most things in life, the more people that use it, the more nuance you'll get in the actual design process. But like everything in life as well, you can't let the excellent be the enemy of the good. So in a perfect world, we'd have 500 testers, we'd have 500 engineers working on it, but we don't have the kind of resources for that. So we're a really interesting lab. I think we're a really innovative lab, but we have kind of certain limitations in our resources. So this is what we'll do. We'll share it for everyone to use. There's things called licenses for open source. It's called Creative Commons licenses and so on. But there'll be a license saying you can use this and you can improve on it. But for example, you can't download the code and commercialize it and sell it. Otherwise, that breaks the terms of the license. So they're the kind of things we'll do. And you're right, somebody can download it and they can use it inappropriately. But again, you go to a garden center and you buy a brush. And you can use that to brush your yard, or you can use it to hit somebody. So
try and brush your teeth.
Exactly. So
you, real problem.
Humans are humans, but at the end of the day, they have a certain responsibility to themselves.
Well, I tell you, it's actually just even interesting as we're talking about testing. Maybe I can bring Chantelle back in with this. I mean, there might be potential, just kind of thinking aloud here, but there might be potential for further contact after the show. Chantelle, you're on mute there, but I don't know if that's a possibility for a bit of communication between NCBI and
that would be, sorry.
Sorry to jump in there. Absolutely. There's huge potential. One of the I guess the advantages of working for the National Sight Loss Agency is that we do have at our disposal, and that's probably not the best word, but hundreds of service users, and we've actually recently set up an accessibility panel whereby people who are interested in feeding into a range of focus groups and user testing and providing feedback to third level education or external companies can do so, but with a particular focus on mobility innovation and the physical environment. We've been looking at transport and shared spaces in particular, because we do want to provide opportunity to feedback and that run as many pilot projects as possible to make sure that things are tested robustly by the end user. So that there's huge potential there. To link in and in particular on the HapNav.
Excellent. Yeah, very good. So maybe we can chat about that a bit more after the show. Hopefully that'll be of use as well, Professor O'Keefe.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I mean, I said the great thing as well is because people can download it. I mean, again, 5 years ago, not to mind 10 years ago, it would have been almost science fiction to say you could download a piece of code and fabricate it yourself on your desk and build the electronics. And there probably are people in your ecosystem that do that. I mean, local libraries now have 3D printers around the world. So there is an offer what's called maker labs. If your listeners would like to look them up, that actually enjoy doing this for the weekend to make little electronic projects and devices. So that's where I imagine a lot of this will be distributed. Maker Labs will make this HapNav device, improve it, and then share the files again to show, as you said, with more testing in Cairo or in Chicago, what nuances they have put into the device.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been fascinating to talk to you. I'm just conscious of not taking too much of your time, Professor O'Keefe, but really appreciate you talking to us about the HapNav. We did say about possibly talking about some of the other Hive projects, but maybe if you want to, if you have time to mention one or two, by all means do. If you don't, maybe just direct us to where we could find out a little bit more about things that are going on with Hive Labs.
So we have lots of other interesting projects with med tech and in the area, especially of digital health. Artificial intelligence, as we all know, is more and more in our lives. Like things like picking songs for us on YouTube or selecting movies to watch on Netflix. So it's no surprise that AI is coming into medicine as well, because a lot of medicine is what we call image-based. If you think of dermatology, you think of radiology, you think of pathology, these specialties spend 10 years training people, 20 years sometimes, to be good at spotting patterns in images. So computers can do that 20 years training in a morning. And therefore, if you build an AI algorithm that can decide if an ultrasound nodule of a thyroid is cancerous or benign, likely, that's tremendous. So we did that last year. We built a piece of software that can classify a nodule on ultrasound as benign or malignant. And that has a massive implication for improving the efficiency of the health service. It not necessarily taking away jobs of clinicians, but what we say, making them operate higher up their license. So instead of a radiologist spending, a whole day looking at 1,000 images that most of them are benign, they end up spending 1 hour looking at 20 images that could be malignant, and then they use their specialty training for that, if that makes sense. So that's a really exciting area is digital health. And then the other thing back around to mobility again is how we become more efficient at moving things. So my lab is interested in things like drone deliveries. So we did a really exciting drone delivery 2 years ago, BC, before COVID, to the Aran Islands. We delivered medicine by drone and brought back blood samples, which was the first in the world BVLOS, beyond visual line of sight for drones. So you can buy a drone in a toy store or online, and you can fly it around a park. But the rule is you must look at it at all times. You must be. So we developed a protocol and a project to fly beyond the horizon, which up to that point in 2019 was only done, as you might know, from TV or movies by the military. So we did it in civilian airspace, and it was a great achievement. And now we're moving that technology forward this summer to do more trials with some of the islands off the west of Ireland. So you'll probably read more about that. And if your listeners would like to learn more about it, the best way to see what's going on in the lab, we also have robots teaching patients about diabetes and nutrition. A really great robot called Dave. So there's a Twitter handle called Dave, the diabetes audiovisual educator. So there's a Twitter handle for the lab called @Hive_lab. So if you just type Hive Lab Galway into Google, it'll pop up. Or indeed, Physicianeer will pop up my handle, and I often tweet about medtech devices. So so there's plenty of ways to follow up what we're doing.
Well, it's been a fascinating conversation. Really appreciate you coming on the show to talk to us about the HapNav and also the other work that's going on with Hive Labs as well. Look forward to seeing how that continues to develop. Thanks very much for joining us, Professor Derek O'Keefe.
Thank you for inviting me.
Very good. So just maybe coming back to Chantelle for a moment. Chantelle, what's kind of next on the horizon for yourself?
There's lots on the horizon, especially when it comes to mobility, innovation, and access. We've a good amount of what we talk about, whether it's on this podcast or through different avenues at NCBI, is around how we work with individuals around their mobility and how they access the built environment on an individual basis, and with devices that are specifically designed with their needs in mind. But a lot of the work that we're doing now is more geared towards supplementing that or enhancing that with preparing the world for people who are blind or vision impaired. So we're looking at more systemic approaches to the built environment, looking at smart cities, looking at how we make the built environment as accessible as possible for people who are blind or vision impaired, rather than just tackling it one person at a time.
Excellent. Yeah, very good. And is that what's involved in, we mentioned the name Possibility Project earlier, is that kind of all part of this?
It's a little bit about what's going on there. So today,
and
I just
obviously
want
there's more of a conversation about this that we'll have in the future as well, but whatever
absolutely.
you can tell us at the moment is great.
Yes, so the Possibility Project is again around how we work through partnership with businesses and stakeholders and bring them into the conversation where they have an agenda to make the environment or their service as accessible as possible for people who are blind or vision impaired. So through the work that we did with Microsoft last year, was born this idea or this concept around the Possibility Project. So the idea is that it's an ongoing initiative working towards overcoming barriers in the built environment, and Microsoft very, very kindly through the work that we did and the input of Michael Leahy as well, made a one-off donation to NCBI, and the idea is that this is an ongoing initiative, but this is a one-off donation by which, under the banner of the guise of the Possibility Project, we're going to use that donation or grant to enable independence and participation in the community for people who otherwise wouldn't have the means to access that technology. So through today and being able to speak about that particular Possibility Project, we are going to go out with an expression of interest for people to apply for a technology pack. Now, there's a bit of a process involved, but we want to make sure that that technology does end up in the hands of people who wouldn't otherwise have the means to purchase it, but whereby it's also going to help them with their mobility and increase their access in the community. So we are, there's a number of iPhone SEs and sets of Aftershock bone conduction headphones that people will be granted when they're successful with that application process.
Very good. And for any more information on that, what does somebody need to do if they're kind of listening to this and thinking, oh, do I get involved in this somehow? Or
absolutely. We're going to go live on Friday with applications, so people can go to our website, or there'll be links available on socials as well, or the Labs newsletter, hopefully at the end of the week as well. There will be a link there by which people can apply for that grant, and it'll be open for a month.
Very good. Well, we look forward to having you back on the show as well, Chantelle. Another time we'll talk about some of the extra things that are going on as well, because I know that it's a bit of a busy time ahead, and it sounds exciting as well, some of the things that are happening. But really appreciate you coming on the show to talk to us today and being part of the conversation about the HapNav as well. So thanks very much for that, Chantelle.
That's my pleasure. I hope we can continue the conversation around mobility innovation and the possibilities that exist, but also with consideration to safety as well, and making sure that we are enhancing people's experience when they are accessing the community, and not compromising their safety either.
Yeah, absolutely. A good point to finish up on with that, I think. So thank you very much, Chantelle. And moving on, it's time for our tech tips for this week. Now, this week's tip comes courtesy of Daniel Dunn. So what have you got for us today, Daniel?
Yeah, Jude, it was a very interesting discussion with Chantelle and Derek there, so well done to the two of them. This week's tech tips is in using the Google Chrome browser. And often you might load up Google Chrome, search for something, and you might have misspelt it, or you mightn't have got exactly what you want in the results. And a quick way to jump back into the search box is just use your / key, one tap off the / key. And similarly, if you're in YouTube, obviously being a Google service itself, you might have searched for something on there, you're not too happy with the results. Instead of shift tabbing all the way back, maybe looking for the search box, quick tap on that / key jumps you straight back into the search box to have another roll of the dice again. So that's this week's little tech tip for Google Chrome users out there.
Excellent, very good. And we'll have another tip for people on our next show, of course. So thanks very much for taking us through this week's tech tip, Daniel. And JP is with us as well to take us through some tech news. I believe there's some updates for AirTags, JP.
There is indeed, Jude. So recently, Apple came out with some measures that they're going to introduce to make the AirTags a little bit safer. The reason why is because there's some incidents of people misusing them. So just to give us a bit of context, AirTags came out last year in April, and they work by letting users know where their personal items are. For example, it could be attached to a set of keys, wallet, purse, bag, and other items, and they can be accessed then or pinpointed then through the Find My app on an iPhone. So the device itself, to describe it, it's about the size, shape of a €2 coin. It's about €35, available on the Apple Store. So an example of someone might use this, for example, if you were to put one in your wallet and you'd use it on a train, then you'd be able to track down, where your wallet is, perhaps at a train station using the Find My app on the iPhone, or perhaps you've misplaced a set of keys at a house and you're able to locate them using the built-in speaker on an AirTag to play a sound. I've been trying out these AirTags for the last few months, and for myself, I use them on a set of keys, and I've actually put them on my bicycle as well, underneath the saddle, just in case anyone were to rob it. I haven't needed to trace it yet, which is kind of a little bit disappointing, to be honest with you, but it's there, which is reassuring. So yeah, as I mentioned, unfortunately,
maybe you should give us all your address, JP. That might help if you want to test it.
I do that. Yeah, I'd love to test it. So yeah, I think unfortunately, and perhaps not unexpectedly, there have been some cases of individuals misusing AirTags to track and stalk individuals and not misplaced items. But Apple has introduced, in fact, further measures to address this problem. So they do have existing measures they put in place to kind of counteract this, and that would include, for example, if someone is misplacing, has put on an AirTag on, perhaps in someone's handbag or in a pocket, then the user will actually receive a notification alert on their phone to let them know that has happened. This is available from I think it was iOS 14.5. So most iPhones nowadays, up-to-date iPhones, should have that feature enabled. But Apple also launched previously an app for Android users in December of last year that will let them know about kind of mystery AirTags that might be following them. But last Thursday, so more recently, last week on Thursday, Apple said that they would be making further improvements to the safety of its AirTag devices to make it more difficult for people to use to track others without their knowledge. And some of these measures would include, for example, like working with law enforcement on all AirTag-related requests received in relation to misuse. This is happening in the States at the moment. So every AirTag has a unique serial number. And there are now law enforcement, it's actually now enforced by law that they can, basically law enforcement can actually, I suppose, charge the perpetrator, just let them know, this is what's happening, and catch them. Okay, so this is actually something that's happening in the US now. But Apple have also introduced new privacy warnings. So they're displayed to the user during AirTag setup rather. So from the time a person will set up an AirTag, they will see a message that states that AirTags are meant to track their belongings only, and using an AirTag to track people without their consent is actually a crime, which we would know, but just some terms and conditions, So effectively, it's a warning message. And the last message as well, perhaps the most useful, I think, in terms of counteracting these misuses of AirTags. It's changes coming to AirTag displays. Changes coming to the AirTag display alert with sound. So when an AirTag automatically emits a sound to alert anyone nearby of its presence and is detected moving with your iPhone, it will also display now an alert on your device that you can take action on. So for example, playing a sound or using precision finding if available. So this will help in cases where an AirTag might be in a location where it's hard to hear, for example, like a handbag or a pocket, or if the AirTag speaker has been tampered with. So if someone has tried to actually disable it or make it harder to hear. So essentially it means the victim has a better chance of hearing the beeps from an AirTag if it has been, for example, placed in a pocket or a handbag or somewhere else hidden. Yeah. So overall, like my thoughts on AirTags, they can be certainly very helpful devices and reuniting users with things they've lost or misplaced valuables. Well, I think these measures will certainly help reduce concerns around privacy and safety. I think I know, Sean, you've been playing with some AirTags too over the last while. What are your thoughts on them? Are you a fan or not?
Quite similar to yourself, JP. They're useful in some scenarios, but that sort of nefarious thing has definitely been addressed with these sort of updates and that there. And I think, you know, there was people thinking they were going to be like Spider-Man and track people with them and solve crimes and everything else. And you know, there's a certain practicality to something like this. And like we've also been testing the Tile, which is, you know, based on Android. I think you can use them on both platforms, but there's been a number of sort of questions then about your data and how you've been tracked, etc. with them. So there's always concerns of like, you know, are you buying a product or are you the product? And much like we've discussed with you know, shows in the past. But I think they're quite useful.
Things,
Don't get wrong, when there's nothing worse than losing your keys and you've searched the entire house for them. So if you can track that down, that's you know, one good thing from them.
Am I right in saying, just with those updates there, that it still is a case of for somebody to actually be able to take advantage of those new protections, they would still have to have done something about it themselves. They would still have to have downloaded an app or something like that onto their phone to get an alert. Is that right?
It's a precision finding. Yeah. It's Find My app. Yeah. Find My. Exactly. So some people might be using, for example, the Find My app to locate their misplaced Apple AirPods. Same principle with the AirTags. Yeah. Gotcha. I think it's good to see these measures being introduced by Apple. I think just to try to offset some of the you know, the safety and privacy concerns and hopefully allay those.
A good word to use, isn't it?
Exactly.
It doesn't completely get rid of
it. Doesn't. No, it doesn't. That's the thing. It doesn't. And those cases, I think they'll still happen. And if I do have my bike ever stolen, I'll make sure to maybe I can record a little demo video on it and play it. How I got my bike back.
Maybe we can steal JP's bike somewhere just to test.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. It's interesting. All the sources I've looked at are cases where there has been misuse. Apple has recommended going straight to, you know, the police or guards in our case. So I said, don't try to take the law into your own hands and go to the go to the house of the person who robbed it. You know. But you know, that's what they say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's good to get a bit of an update on the AirTags, and who knows, we might get an update from JP's bike at some point in the future. Very good. And we have another little bit of tech news as well, don't we? Just kind of closer to home, really. What's the latest on the NCBI technology training courses?
Yeah, thanks, Jude, for reminding me. So we have some upcoming training courses in the next few weeks, and these are on touch typing, on smart speakers, focusing on the Amazon Echo, iPad and the NVDA screen reader. So all of these courses range from 60 to 90 minutes in duration, and would advise anyone to check out the website and the event section to see about the dates. They are starting tomorrow. The 16th is actually the touch typing course, and they'll be running up till the 24th is the NVDA course. But if you want to keep an eye on the website for dates and registration as well, you can send an email to training@ncbi.ie if you would like to register today for any of those courses. They're all level 1 introductory courses, but there will be follow-up training level 2 courses commencing in March. The other piece of technology news I wanted to mention is our virtual clubs, virtual technology clubs. So it's a reminder to listeners, about the virtual clubs that are taking place every Wednesday. And so these are online chat groups, and they take place Wednesday from the hours. It could be between 11 and 1 o'clock, depending on which virtual club you join. 1 hour in duration, and you'll be discussing the latest developments and innovations relating to technology for sight loss, such as perhaps the Jedi Glove. That might be a good conversation for the virtual clubs tomorrow, and HapNav Watch. So each club has an IT trainer, and they're able to answer questions and share resources where needed. There's 7 clubs throughout the country that one of which you can join. We have one in Southwest, Midwest. We've got one in the West, Northwest, Midlands, East, and Dublin, which I am involved in. So, like for example, in Dublin, which we can talk about new emerging technologies. I always really enjoy hearing people's opinions and suggestions during the club meeting. So, like for example, last week, we'll have someone who gave some tips on using their smart speaker, and tomorrow we're going to be discussing our favorite podcast shows. So besides the talking technology, so
excellent. Yeah, that's always going to be the number one show.
Of course,
second place one's back down the list, is it?
Yeah, exactly, Daniel. So I'd say clubs club meetings every Wednesday between 11 and 1. So it depends on which club you join. For Dublin, we're 12 to 1, but some of them are a little bit earlier. And you can email training@ncbi.ie to join up.
Excellent. So plenty going on with the tech clubs and the training courses as well. I've heard great things about the smart speaker training courses. I just I don't want to put it out there too much as if it's me involved in any way or anything like that, but great things about it. They've all had actually brilliant feedback. So yeah, excellent courses, all of them, the iPad, the MVDA and the smart speaker courses, and as JP mentioned, there's going to be the level 2 courses coming online very soon. Excellent. Good to get a little bit of news on that score as well. So watch this space, quite literally, both on the podcast here, but also on the website, or contact us at Labs if you have any inquiries as well. So that pretty much brings the show to a close today. Hopefully you've enjoyed the discussion. You've enjoyed hearing a bit more about the HapNav. And again, any questions, you can get in touch with us. Please do let us know as well if there's anything that you'd like us to cover in a future show as well. A reminder as always before we finish that if you do need technology assistance, you can get support from the Labs team from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday on 1800 911 110, or you can email labs@ncbi.ie. Or if you want to avail of wider NCBI services, you can call 1800 911 250 or email info@ncbi.ie. And of course, we always appreciate your support of NCBI. If you'd like to make a donation to help support our services, you can do that through donate.ncbi.ie. Just before we go, just a reminder of what we'll be talking about in future live events. There's a word game that's really caught fire, really kind of captured the attention of so many people around the world again. And you've probably heard of it. Wordle, I think, is I've seen it written more than I've heard it actually pronounced. So I hope I'm saying it right. But is that something that's accessible, or how can you make it accessible? Well, we're going to be talking about that on a future live event. We're also going to have another big debate, JAWS versus NVDA. You can't get much bigger than that. So get your comments into us so that we can include your thoughts in that show as well. And we're going to continue to have some equipment reviews from some of the NCBI Labs team, such as we had the Echo show, of course, on the last podcast. So we'll continue with reviews like that as well. A reminder that our next show is on the first Tuesday of March. So that's March the 1st. And that is the usual time of 2:30. And if you want to stay up to date with what's happening on our live events, our technology podcasts, as well as plenty more, then you can subscribe to our newsletter on our website, or you can email us at labs@ncbi.ie if you'd like to do that. So all that's left for me to do today is to thank our guests, Chantelle Smith and Professor Derek O'Keefe. And of course, thanks to everyone for listening in as well. And from John, Paul, George and Ringo, and even Sean and Daniel, goodbye for now. And we look forward to having you all back with us for the next edition of Talking Technology with NCBI Labs.